is Off-Planet Radio.
A dimension of insight, a dimension of understanding. You are entering the place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits, there are no boundaries. This is Off-Planet Radio.
Once again, Off-Planet Radio Live. I'm Randy Moggins, and it is Friday the 13th in February 2015. If you're superstitious, well, I like dancing on the edge. I like using the occult numbers against them. And we have a great show lined up for tonight. My guest will be on in just a minute. We did not live stream last week because I was away, and I sometimes fail to communicate that thing to the proper authorities, so I deeply regret the fact that some of you missed that. I actually got a phone call about that. Gosh, that's embarrassing. Anyway, next week, I want to tell you, will be very interesting. Once you hear the show tonight, next week's show will make so much more sense because I'm going to have L.B. Bork on. He is the author of The Red Amendment, the book that blows the lid off the 14th Amendment and lets you know historically how America went on the trajectory towards being a socialist state. Yes, it happened in the 1870s. America went commie. And, of course, that opened the door for the bankers and the elitists and the Zionists and everybody else to come right through. And wham, 1913, you get the Federal Reserve, you get the income tax, and it's all holds barred. Here we go. And my guest tonight really brings to light exactly where all of this has been going. What the heck happened on September 11th, 2001. What really happened? And what happens when a book that's written as a work of, well, we'll say fiction, it's a novel form, holds more truth than all of the media news accounts that you've heard for the last 14 years in dealing with the facts about 9/11? What happens when one person with a background in the airline industry goes digging into the details of 9/11 and comes up with information that experienced researchers have ignored for nearly 15 years? My guest tonight is Rebekah Roth, and her book is called Methodical Illusion. And by the time you get done with this show tonight, once you tape your head back together, you too will understand that what we've been living in has been very much a methodical illusion. We welcome to the air tonight my guest, Rebekah Roth. Welcome, Rebekah.
Well, thank you, Randy. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on to do this show. When I came in contact with your material, I was gobsmacked. I was like, holy crap, somebody has really found the mother lode. And it wasn't where I thought it would come from. It wasn't some grizzled journalist in a gray trench coat somewhere. It turns out that you, a professional in the airline industry for, I guess, decades, who began ferreting out details that only you could have probably put together based on your experience and background. And you pull together details that are so rich and that underline the level of deception that we've all faced that, I had to have you on. And so here we are tonight. First, tell people a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to become a 9/11 truther.
Well, that's a good story in itself. I flew for about 30 years at the time of 9/11 and retired about 2004. Like many other people, I knew there was something wrong with the story of 9/11 from day one. I luckily was home watching it unfold on television, so I got the media's interpretation of it, and many, many red flags came up for me, but I wasn't able to wrap my mind around it. One, I was still working, and what happened on 9/11 was we got to see as professionals in the airline that all the safety nets that we thought were in place to keep you passengers safe and us safe and the airplane safe weren't there. And so it was very difficult to go back to work and to, reassure passengers that everything was great, because you knew there was something very wrong with the system after 9/11. None of the airline corporate people or safety or security people would talk about 9/11. We just didn't know what was going on. So I had a really interesting thing happen. I was always that flight attendant on the crew that all these exciting things happened to. So everyone in my, coworkers were always saying, you should write a book. And so after I retired, even though I knew there was something wrong with 9/11 and lots of things wrong with it, I never really looked back. I never looked into it. And so I thought in maybe 2009 or thereabouts, I thought, I'm going to write a book about being a flight attendant, because it's really a mystery to a lot of people, and people don't understand. I remember before I hired on, I thought are they going to just give me a sleeping bag and I just go from plane to plane? I just had no idea what the lifestyle entailed. So I could remember when before I got hired and before I started flying, I was just, where do you sleep? I mean, what country do you sleep in? When does this stop? And, I just didn't have any clue. And so I realized that most people don't. And it's kind of a mysterious job, and it's a job that most women really always say, before I got married, I really wanted to do that, or before I went into college and went on a different road, I really wanted to do that. And it's a job that's very kind of fun and mysterious to a lot of people. So I thought, I'll just write a book about that. And I got into this book, and I wanted to pull a character. I was building a character, and I wanted to give my character a Middle Eastern name. And so I thought, maybe I'll just Google search the 9/11 hijackers. So in my computer I go, 9/11 hijackers. And lo and behold, I almost probably will never forget this day. Right in my top of my Google search, thank you, Google, was my wake-up call. A BBC article dated September 21st, 2001, stating that at least 6 of the accused hijackers were still alive, that the Saudi Arabian government was suing the United States government, in particular the FBI, for using the Saudi Arabian airline pilots' ID, their passport photos, and they even gave their home addresses. And I thought, oh my. Can you imagine traveling around the world for a living, and this is what you do for a living? I could relate because I did it. And then all of a sudden be have all fingers in the world pointing at you, that you pulled off the largest terror attack in the world, and yet you're a captain or a co-pilot for Saudi Air, and you're flying around, and they've got your passport picture, and so when you go into immigrations, traveling internationally, you show your passport, and so that thing has been spread all over CNN International, worldwide, and it's your picture. I mean, I just oh my goodness. So I thought, well, how can this be that these 6 guys lived through these crashes that we all experienced on television? Now, I studied airplane crashes as part of my training and my recurrent training, so my mind just went flip. I just thought, wait a minute. Now, how can these guys still be alive? And how is it that the Saudi government was going to sue the FBI, and whatever happened to that lawsuit? Never, ever heard a word about it on the media. Well, I put my original book aside, and I started in on some really serious 9/11 research. Now, I know that this is something a lot of people can't do. Lots of women don't like to do this kind of work. But I went in at somebody referred to me as a Perry Mason. I just went in totally. I mean, I always thought it was the Arab hijackers. So I went in and said, well, how did this happen? How did they live through this? And then I kind of, looked into those characters and what planes they were supposed to be on. And then I remembered looking back in the mid-90s or so, getting an FAA and Interpol bulletin that if we, are at a hotel, in a layover hotel, and we always stay at the same hotel, and we don't have a sleeping bag. But when we're at our hotel, when we go out for dinner or go to the gym or leave our room for any reason, that we should take our airline ID and our passport, because there was a theft ring going on. They were hitting airline people. And I remembered that, and I thought, here are these Saudi pilots, they got their stuff stolen. But I couldn't imagine continuing to fly, having been pegged as this major hijacker, so around the world. I mean, because CNN International is everywhere. And, of course, hours after 9/11, they were showing us these pictures of these guys and their names and everything. So I was just kind of blown away that this would happen. And as I started looking, I remembered watching on television the Pentagon strike and hearing Jamie McIntyre say on CNN, no airplane hit that building. And I was watching it, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. There's no airplane crash there. Because I've worked a lot of 757s, and that's a big aircraft. And the tail section would have been outside that building. It just couldn't have kept on going through, and there would have been a crash site on the outside of that building. Keep in mind, not only is the Pentagon the most protected. I mean, there's Patriot missiles all around the complex of the Pentagon. It is huge. It is the most protected building in the entire world, with these Patriot missiles and other forms of security.
Yeah.
And also the area where the supposed plane hit had just recently been reinforced with Kevlar and steel. And I'm thinking, there's no way an aluminum plane disappeared into the Pentagon. It would bounced right off. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, no plane crash there. And Shanksville, again, on that day, I watched that 10 o'clock in the morning or so. And there was no plane. They showed a ditch that there was no plane parts there. And, titanium engines and landing gear. These aircraft are big, and there's all kinds of things that always survive crashes. And usually, if you'll remember, and if any of your listeners want to, just Google search 757 crash and look in the images, and you'll see there's always a huge tail section. I think everybody remembers seeing the Air France plane that even went into the ocean and pulled the big tail out. Yeah. There's always this tail section and other things like landing gear and stuff. They don't disappear ever. And so as I started digging into this whole 9/11 thing, and I just kept reverting back to the aircraft and the crash sites and what did we see. And you remember that the only thing we saw going into the North Tower was a very short video clip that the Naudet brothers happened to catch, and that whatever that is moving so fast that you can't focus on it in a short time frame. And it's so fast that nobody can even slow the film down, the video down. to be able to see what that is. And there's just some oddball things about the planes that hit the towers. And you'll remember seeing the plane that hit the South Tower, which is when I turned my television on. I got a phone call and turned my TV, and I saw that. And even today, if I watch a video and I see that plane go through that building like a hot knife through butter, I really, truly thought someone was joking with me. I thought somebody was messing with my television, or it was some kind of trick photography or something, because planes can't go into a solid steel structure. They're aluminum. I've seen hailstorms and bird strikes just destroy large aircraft. I mean, to the point where you couldn't fly them, so they had to go back into the hangar and have structural.
But that particular frame was replayed, looped almost literally for 24 hours. We watched that over and over and over again.
And I remember those days saying, why do they keep showing this over and over and over again? Well, since then, I got into understanding how brainwashing and mind control work. Exactly. And so I tell people now, there's so much more that I've gained from all of the research I did that really I couldn't even put into this, all of it into this book. But the fact that the CIA has run our television sets since the 50s, and it is a perfect way to brainwash you. And so now I have a television only because I don't have to pay for it. I mean, it came with my internet, so I have cable because it came with my internet. I didn't have a choice. So I go down now and I'll turn on the news channels, like if I'm going to cook dinner or something, and turn on those just to see how they're brainwashing the masses to think where you're going now. If you turn on now, you can see ISIS and the war and troops back in Iraq and where they're making Iran and the next boogeyman, and you can just kind of read through the lines, and it's just over and over and over again. And so then I remember I kept thinking, why are they showing this plane going into this building? Well, they needed to make that your reality, and the only way you can brainwash someone is by repeating. Well, not the only way, but one of the best ways is by repeating something. Was it Goebbels, Hitler's buddy, that said, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes people's reality. And so looking back now, knowing what I know, I understand why they did that.
Yeah, this is well understood for anybody that studied brainwashing, mind control. CIA, obviously, going back to its inception, was involved with mind control projects. It was Operation Paperclip migrated over. So they're experts at this. And the act of looping this video over and over again was a reinforcement technique. They knew that people were tuned into their televisions. They knew that they were going to see this. And even that first day, I kept going. This is amazing. They're looping this. It's over and over and over again until it's in your head. And the more it's in your head, that imagery, the less you objectively begin to question things. And that's powerful.
And what I saw also by them looping that over and over again and looking back in retrospect as I did my research was I was always amazed at how fast these gigantic custom-made American flags showed up at the destruction site of the towers, all of the large buildings. And there were things that I thought, well, this is so weird. I mean, if you went out right now this coming week and tried to buy a flag that's 15 feet by 30 or 25 or whatever the dimensions are for these gigantic flags that were hanging off of all of the construction cranes, all of the buildings that were surrounding the rubble of the World Trade Center. Every building around the country was laying out these gigantic flags. When I went back to the airline, we were not allowed to really put things on our suitcase, but then after 9/11, I didn't go back and actively work a trip for about 10 days. So, but things were in full swing then, and we had stickers that were American flags. And I look back now, and it's just like the Super Bowl. Pick your team. And even our president stood up and he said, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." There's no gray area. You're either here or there. And if you're there, we can kill you because you're a terrorist. And we're going to label you as a non-patriotic traitor and a terrorist to your country. And you'll remember what he did right away. He made you choose your colors based like gang warfare. And so we were all choosing the red, white, and blue and the stars and stripes and sticking our flags on our cars and everything else. And people don't even realize how manipulated they were. And looking back, I remember thinking, well, how'd they come up with all these gigantic custom flags so quick? And not only that, but a friend of mine was a New York firefighter. And the day of 9/11 and the following morning when they showed up on the pile to start looking for people that might have survived, they had people on the streets handing out little flags that hooked to their firefighter helmet. And it's unheard of. I mean, this would not happen on the 4th of July in this country. Somebody was ready with a lot of flags, and they unrolled immediately. And so you see there was a lot of manipulation going on. And sports and that whole Super Bowl event, that whole rivalry thing, we had to have an enemy. And I realized looking at this, using that manipulative thought process, that the cell phone calls made from those flights had to have been made to paint the illusion of who the enemy was. Because we were all out there, we're fighting, man. We're gonna tell us who to kill. Just tell us. We'll just sign me up. I'm going to go over there and kill them all. Those ragheads, I'm going to kill them all. Well, what I discovered as I was going through all this research is at least 10 of the 19 hijackers are still alive. Were never on the passenger manifest. The passenger manifest that we were shown on television on CNN, compliments of the FBI, were fake. So, and originally they actually had 4 other Arab-sounding people in that first 72 hours that they changed, and we don't even know that because, to us, Arab names are all weird. They're not Jones and Smith and Johnson and things that we are used to. So if it's Al-Hazmi or Al-Hazimi, we don't know. It's one of those Arab names. It's Al something or other. And so what happened, I found this out just while I was finishing up the book, actually, and kind of starting to work on the sequel. What happened is the FBI claimed that they had the passenger manifest and that these 19 hijackers that they claimed were on the manifest were these people. Well, unfortunately for them, they, let's say 3 of the people they claimed were alive and showed up. One of them was an FAA employee in aviation safety based in Florida.
Oh, my.
His brother, who they claimed was also on the manifest, now this is that first manifest they released to the television, his brother had died a year earlier in a small plane crash in Florida. So he went to the FBI and said, hey, first off, I'm an FAA employee, aviation safety specialist, and my brother has been dead for a year, so we definitely were not on the passenger manifest. We are not terrorists. And so it's really interesting because there was a guy at the FAA, I forgot his name, it's like Hopkins or something, but he's just kind of like office geek. And he gets these names of the hijackers, and he starts running all the original 19. He starts running their names through a computer and database that the FAA has. I don't know if they had the no-fly list at the time or what, but lo and behold, he finds that this one guy that they're claiming is a hijacker is an FAA aviation safety specialist in Florida. So he takes this to his boss and he said, well, one of the hijackers works for us. They fired him. He got his job back. But I mean, you think about that's pretty bizarre right there.
Yeah.
He came with the truth that this guy, in fact, was an employee of the FAA, and then at the same time, the employee shows up and says, "My brother's dead, and I wasn't a hijacker." So the guy the office geek loses his job. because he spoke the truth. And then the other two guys were also alive. They showed up. So somewhere in that first 72 hours, the FBI had to change their story. And you'll remember the story of Mohammed Atta, how he rented a car in Boston and left it and then flew up for some reason to Portland, Maine, and then barely had time to connect with Flight 11 as he came back into Boston. But he left his car with a Koran and a flight and his will and a flight bag and some flight manuals and stuff. Well, that was originally, that whole story belonged to one of the Bukhari brothers that one was dead and one was alive. So they quickly had to change their whole story. Well, so I started discovering that the FBI was actually lying about a lot of things they found, not just who was on the passenger manifest, covering up the whole story.
How common would it be to so instantaneously be able to get a hold of lists and bring them out that quickly?
Very uncommon. When you're involved in an accident, everybody will love hearing this, but if you're involved in any kind of a hijacking or an incident, accident, or whatever, the airline will notify your next of kin. And keep in mind that day there were 250 or so passengers that the two airlines needed to contact. They also contact the next of kin from all the crew members. If there's any non-revving crew members or fellow crew members that are riding along in our jump seats in the cockpit or in the aircraft cabin, they would be contacted as well. So that was another thing that struck me very, very odd. We have a saying in the airline industry, kind of let the press be damned, and we don't talk to them. And so
I love it.
I thought that was really weird. How did CNN get the manifest? Well, since my book came out, I have had so many flight attendants and all kinds of employees, especially from American, but several from United as well. And the original manifests do exist, and there is not one Arab name on the original manifests. The only one you'll see are fake ones they put on the internet.
Now, how available are these flight manifests, and how subject to tampering would they be under what you would consider to be ideal circumstances? I get the sense that a flight manifest, it's a document. It has to have a certain, what you would call trail of evidence, mainly because this is cargo. I mean, whether it's passengers or freight or whatever, there are legal and financial repercussions to tampering with this kind of thing.
Exactly. And what happens when you generate a passenger manifest is the ticket agents and the reservations people, they both have two different processes. When the reservations people take your information, and let's say you're on Flight 11 on September 11th from Boston to Los Angeles, you're given a code. And so your reservation, and you'll see this if you go on like Southwest, you'll get a code that's like a 6 or 10-digit number. It's referred to as like a CID code or something. Everybody's got a little different name for it depending upon the computer system that they use. And that code then, when you go take your documents to the ticket counter and you're going to get on the plane, they document you into a computer system again and reconfirm you're walking on the aircraft. And so at the end of that, once all the passengers have cleared, and I know some people don't understand this, but sometimes we clear a gate maybe 5 minutes or 3 minutes before the aircraft has to push back, which is their departure time. That means it's pushing back from the gate. The ticket agent needs time to print that list, and it comes out on a long piece of paper. And on that list will be things like if you're a kosher meal, if you need a wheelchair when you land, if you're a child traveling alone, if there's any kind of special services, if you're a Million Mile Club member or somebody that's been maybe on a bereavement, that you're on your way to a funeral, family funeral or something like that. There's all kinds of information like that for the crew. And so once they close, what they call it, close the flight down, the computer then prints out this little sheet of paper, and the ticket agent runs out to the airplane, hopefully before the pushback time, so they can get an on-time departure. And then they hand it to the lead flight attendant. The lead flight attendant basically says, "We're set to go. Everybody's in their seats. There's nobody standing in the aisle. They can shut the door." She tells the pilot, "We're ready to go." And that is the last passenger manifest. Now, that manifest is in a computer system. So it's secured within the airline. So you would have to be a ticket agent or someone involved with the airline to actually get to that. There isn't much time to manipulate it because it's there, and once the flight closes, that's the final list of passengers, and so kind of that's how that works. One of the things I've had a lot of people ask me about, and that were non-airline people, and I saw this a lot as I was researching 9/11, is that people think that because the planes from United 77 and 11 were never entered into the BTS system, that they never operated. And I don't know if you've heard that or not.
BTS system.
The BTS is Bureau of Transportation Statistics, I think is what it stands for. And this was a government agency that was started up in, I think it was around 92, 93, somewhere in there. And basically, if you'll look back, you'll remember hearing commercials for the most on-time departures, or the most on-time arrivals, or the most on-time airline. Right. And so what would happen is that BTS data would go with a flight number, let's say Flight 11. And Flight 11, every time it pushes from the gate at Boston at 7:59 a.m., sees 25 other aircraft in line to get off the ground. And so you got all that ground traffic. And if you've ever flown in and out of a big hub, you've seen this, and probably, and as morning hours, you've been stuck in it. Yeah. So you got this scheduled time, and let's say it's 6 hours, just to make it simple. Mm-hmm. And you stay on the ground for 40 minutes in that train of airplanes waiting for that takeoff roll. And so that 40 minutes, and then you get in the air and you're going west and you get headwinds, so it slows you down even more. Mm-hmm. And so you're an hour late. And so what they would do is they'd take this flight every day, and it was arriving into Los Angeles an hour, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, 50 minutes late. And so the BTS data was on a flight number. And so to beat that, some of the airlines actually would change the numbers all the time. So instead of Flight 11 going one direction, Flight 12 coming back, 1 month they would make it, 8 and 9 as the flight numbers instead of 11, 12. 11, 12 was the standard daily flight on American Airlines, however. Went out Flight 11 from Boston, and when it returned back from LA, I believe it was Flight 12. And that's why Betty Ong made a mistake, because she was already on her way home mentally. So you always had numbers like that. I'm on Flight 7, Flight 8, Flight 3, Flight 4. And those were daily flights. They did operate. But after the incident on 9/11, there was no reason to keep the data, because they kind of retired those numbers, I'm pretty sure, for quite a while. I don't even know if they're still operating. But you would not, if you were a passenger, you would not be comfortable getting on American Airlines Flight 11 or Flight 77 probably to this very day.
No, not really, no.
So there was no reason for them to put that in there. And that BTS was only for keeping track of that on-time data. It wasn't whether the plane actually left or not. And if that plane didn't ever land, well, and they weren't ever going to use that flight number again, or at least for several years, there was no reason to put it there. So that's takes care of that. I know a lot of people were really confused, and they thought there was voice morphing, and they faked all the crew members. Since my book has come out, I have had, I don't even know how many, probably 24 or more American Airlines flight attendants, pursers, and pilots contact me about the crew members that were on board those flights, how they would have acted if they knew they were being hijacked, and that type of thing. So
let's go through the irregularities that led you to conclude, first off, that what was reported to have hit the World Trade Center that morning did not, and what happened to the actual flights and what you think really hit the Trade Center and then we'll go to the Pentagon and Western Pennsylvania. But I'm interested now on the details that took you to the place where you went, wait a minute, something was interrupted. This flight wound up not being what hit the World Trade Center, so where did it go? Because I think that question and the answers that you come up with are some of the most compelling evidence I've seen so far of just how hideous this whole plot was.
Yes, that's very true. Well, what I kept doing was going back to my initial training and my yearly training and the FAA protocols for hijacking and other emergencies. And I started really dwelling in on the times that the phone calls were made, and to me, whether they were made from a phone that was part of the aircraft, an aerophone, or a cell phone, it didn't really matter. What I was looking for was what the details were being said and how they were being said. And so I built these incredibly complex charts all around my office for this, because I kept going back to none of the flight attendants followed FAA protocol. And I think of all the messages I'm getting from flight attendants now after the book has come out and they've read it, is I've always wondered that same thing. Why didn't the flight attendants and the pilots follow protocol that was, it was set in stone. We had something called the common strategy, and that was basically to delay. We had all these delay tactics to delay a hijacker from getting in the cockpit, and code words, and none of these things were used, and it was very odd. So as I went back and I looked through all of the documents I could find, and I tried to use government documents as much as I could. I found the FBI document, and I think this was put into both the Zachariah Moussaoui trial and the 9/11 commission hearing. And I found a transcript typed from Betty Ong. She was the first flight attendant to call in to reservations, which also is crazy for any flight attendant. No flight attendant would call reservations. That's a guaranteed hold for 20 minutes. And even American flight attendants have told me that was really a weird thing for them to call in. So she calls a reservations agent, and she says, according to the FBI document, she says he, as in one hijacker, he stood upstairs. And I looked at that, and I read it over and over again, and I said to my husband, there are no stairs on a 767, which is what she was on. There are only stairs on a 747. But there are stairs in a hangar. And then the next thing she said, or right along in there, one of the very first things she said, referring to the hijacker as just one singular he, besides he stood upstairs, she said he has sprayed mace or pepper spray in business class. We can't breathe in business class. And let me tell you, if you spray pepper spray or mace, both of them are illegal and were at that time to bring on board an aircraft for this reason. If you spray pepper spray or mace in a pressurized cabin, the hijackers, the flight attendants, the passengers, and the pilots would all be breathing whatever that aerosol was. You would be coughing and choking. And for people that have, kind of witnessed things that have gone on, like at Ferguson or Occupy Wall Street rallies, where you've seen and maybe been a part of tear gas, mace, or pepper spray, it's not a picnic. And the thing that I thought was really odd is that if they sprayed this in a pressurized cabin, these two flight attendants, they were on the phone for 27 minutes. And not in either one of them coughed, had a hard time breathing, choking, none of that. And so putting that together and the details, what they were saying, and then at the very end of the flight, one of the flight attendants was asked, where are you? What can you look out the window? What do you see? And she said, I see water. I see buildings. Oh no. Well, any flight attendant's been around for 6 months knows Manhattan. And she was coming in.
Yeah.
She was 1 minute from striking the North Tower. And let me tell you, New York is like 360 square miles. It's huge. Mm-hmm. And it's a very popular city to go into as a junior flight attendant for every airline. And there is just no way you could look out the window and not know where you were. And I thought, well, and how long has she been flying? And I believe she had like 13 years seniority. She was well senior enough to know where she was at. And I just thought, well, this is really odd. Then I sat and I took those two flight attendants out. Flight 11 only had 2 calls. And they were 2 flight attendants. One called her supervisor and one called reservations. And they both told 2 conflicting stories. And here's the thing. A flight attendant, first off, you know how important details are, especially in a hijacking. Because if you're talking to somebody on the ground, there's specific things you would want to say if you were crazy enough to make that phone call. And if you were crazy enough to stay on that phone for a half hour, because the thing you're not supposed to do is something like that. I mean, you were to sit down, cover your wings and name tag, maybe with a blanket or some jacket or whatever, and pretend you're a passenger and do not draw any attention to yourself. Well, nothing would be more intimidating to a hijacker than being 2 flight attendants sitting on the phone. I mean, that's just crazy. That would be a crazy thing to do. And then I'm looking, and Betty Ong is saying that she's seated at her jump seat, which is, I believe, aft facing. So she's facing away from what's going on up by the cockpit door. She's 159 feet away from the hijacking. She doesn't know what's going on. She's she's behind the last row coach. Amy Sweeney, the other flight attendant who's on the phone the same length of time to her supervisor, is saying she's seated in the second to the last row in coach. Now, Betty is saying she's at her jump seat at 3R, but Amy Sweeney is saying that Betty Ong is sitting in this row with me. Now, which is it? It would only be one thing, because the truth is only one thing. And then another interesting thing I found looking through just those details is that Amy Sweeney says the hijacker initially is 9B. Well, 9B, he's an interesting character. 9B is actually a trained assassin from a foreign intelligence agency. He's also considered to be an anti-hijacking specialist.
Now, how do you know that? Now, just tell us where you got that information from.
You can easily find this by putting in a Google search, okay. 9B, Flight 11 on 9/11. His name is, there's millions of input. He was all over the media. There's books on him. I mean, there's just so much information on this guy. He was a member of what's called the Sayeret Mat Call, which is a special operations unit of intelligence, a highly trained assassin. He was also a hostage rescue specialist and an anti-hijacking specialist. He was fluent in English, English language. He grew up in Denver, Colorado. He was fluent in Hebrew and fluent in Arabic. And when the flight attendant said originally indicating only one hijacker, Betty Ong did, but Amy Sweeney said that this 9B was originally the hijacker and only one hijacker. And that told me a lot, because flight attendants would never make the mistake of claiming you, if you weren't, a hijacker, because the whole name of the game was to get the plane on the ground, and then the Delta Force or the Navy SEALs or FBI SWAT team, whatever was nearest by, would swarm the aircraft, bust in, and whoever 9B was probably wouldn't live to tell a story or write a book about it. You know what I'm saying? So it's not something that a flight attendant would make a mistake about. Which, these are the things that I know my training, and I know they were trained the same way I was. So, and I'm thinking, well, here's one saying that this guy is being tended to. Amy Sweeney was saying he was stabbed, and then first she said he was shot, but then they decided there wasn't a gun on board. Then he was stabbed. He was stabbed by a box cutter, according to the story as we're putting all the pieces together. But he's also seated in the row ahead of 2 Arabic-speaking people who were planning a hijacking, and he was fluent in Arabic. Now, his friends said about him that he could kill any human being using a pen and a credit card. That's what they said. This guy was incredibly trained. He could kill any human with a pen and a credit card. Mm-hmm. And yet he sat there. And now anybody that's been on an airplane, even in business class, you're only about 18 to 24 inches away from somebody's mouth that's sitting in the row behind you. And if you just think back at the flights that you've been on, those people talking in the row behind you because they're talking over loud jets, you're hearing everything they're saying.
Everything.
So, so you, of course, logically,
things you don't want to hear. Yes.
Exactly. Over the years, I've heard some pretty incredible stories.
Yeah.
So I started putting all my logic together, and I thought, well, now, if this guy could kill anybody with a pen and a credit card, and he was on a business trip, surely he had both of those things. He's sitting 18 to 24 inches away from these Arab-speaking guys planning a hijacking, talking to each other. What would be the chances of them deciding to kill him for no reason? And then why would the flight attendant say he was the hijacker? And both of those flight attendants only said there was one hijacker, and he was a he. And they only pointed to one on Flight 11. And so these are the things I just started gathering. And I thought, well, this is really odd that we're expected to believe that a highly trained assassin. Now, keep in mind, this guy's like the Israeli Jack Bauer. I mean, you know, if you ever saw that TV show, this guy is a trained assassin. That's what they do. They leave Israel and they go and assassinate leaders around. That's what they do. This is Sayeret Methodical. And so I found that was really kind of fascinating. And I actually uncovered a lot of information that along the lines with him and other passengers that were probably what I refer to in the book as handlers, not hijackers. But, I mean, the planes were hijacked using what's called a flight termination system. And what happens when the flight termination system takes over an onboard flight computer is that you lose the transponder. So the air traffic control automatically sees that you're gone off radar, and you lose all forms of communication. Now, I remember when these things were being sold to the airlines, and here's how they were being sold by Boeing. And this is interesting. The flight termination systems built by a company called SPC, Sam Paul Charlie Corporation, SPC, and they make the flight termination systems actually the system that runs all of our drones across the world. And so the interesting thing is the CEO of SPC was also the comptroller at the U.S. Pentagon. And remember on September 10th, Donald Rumsfeld announced that they were on the trail in investigating this misplaced $2.3 trillion with a T dollars from the Pentagon. And so the same guy that's the comptroller also owns this company that they make the flight termination system. Well, they sold it to Boeing, and Boeing tried to sell it, I guess, to the airlines. And here it is. Listen carefully to the language they use to sell it to American United, all the carriers. In the event of a hijacking, and the hijacker got inside the cockpit and took control of the aircraft, we can land the plane remotely where it will be liberated by, the Delta Force. Well, so what was going on Flight 11 and Flight 77 and Flight 175 and Flight 93? There were hijackers that had taken over the cockpit, right? So why didn't anybody trigger this flight termination system? Because it was already in use. And one of the other things that Betty Ong said is we can't talk to the cockpit. They aren't answering their phone. We can't communicate with the cockpit. And that's one of the first things that happens when this thing takes over. It takes over by using a frequency, like a radio frequency. Mm-hmm. And so when it does that, it overrides the transponder. So the air traffic controllers lose the airplane. They don't see the transponder
Well, I'm
anymore.
assuming that this takes over the transponder, the avionics, the telemetry, and everything else.
Exactly. It's completely now being remotely flown, and the SPC Corporation actually makes mobile units. They're like in a big truck, like a kind of a box truck, that will run 8 droned aircraft at once from one unit. So, yeah, and they can be run everywhere. I mean, we run from Creech Air Force Base, which is just north of Las Vegas, Nevada. We run most of our drones in Afghanistan and Oman and Yemen and all those other places, Pakistan, through there. So it's actually looks kind of, their system kind of looks like a pinball machine or some kind of a computer game that they sit at, and it's got a chair attached to it and a screen in front of it. But that drone that they're flying through with the FTS is a long ways away.
I wish I could source this right now as you were talking about this. I have to go back through. Years ago when I was interviewing someone, they told me that this system had actually been around and implemented informally as late as the late 1970s after we had the Cuban hijacking. So this is not technically even a new system.
That's correct. They had successfully taken 737s and actually taken off, flown them, and landed them using the same system long time before 9/11. And so the flight termination system was actually sort of a plug-in device that was easily, I say it was almost as simple as a USB plug into your computer. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that, if the plane didn't have it on board, that it would take, months to add. It was a pretty easy device for them to put right into the bone. It was designed that way to be put in there.
Retrofitted right into the existing components.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Uh-huh. And then interestingly enough, you can find this on a Google search too. Lufthansa, which is the German government's owned airline, and China both busted Boeing for putting flight termination systems on planes they'd taken delivery of, and they sued them. So there's lawsuits in there from Germany and China toward Boeing over this flight termination system plug-in that had been put on their aircraft, and they did not want that. And there's a lot of information available with that, but that's how it was done. Now, as I kept digging into this, do we still have enough time? I'll tell you just a little bit.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes on this end, and then the other side of it's a big one, so you're good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And then what I found is there were two companies that were inside the FAA headquarters for 2 years leading up to 9/11. One of them was called P-Tech, which was a brand new software company. It was only about 3 years old when it got into 22 U.S. government computer systems, thanks to Michael Chertoff. Now, it's interesting because the company was foreign-owned and foreign-financed by a Lebanese gentleman and a Saudi Arabian gentleman were their main financiers. And then the marketing guy who was getting it put in was a Jewish gentleman who was a lawyer who left his law firm to become the marketing guy for P-Tech. Good friends with Michael Chertoff. Michael Chertoff got him into 22 U.S. Computer systems. Now, that computer company was running a software called Promise Software that had been stolen from the Department of Justice in the mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And they had installed into that software a backdoor, which enabled them to do things on computer screens. Like right now, they could put pornography on our screens if they wanted to do that, and they were into our systems. Yeah. They could, they and the MITRE company, MITRE, for 2 years. The day of 9/11, there were many war games going on. What P-Tech and MITRE, I guess it is. It's called MITRE. I keep calling it MITRE, but it's MITRE, like lighter with an M. They were actually there to make fake bogeys or targets on radar for the military games. So what they were able to do, once the flight termination system took over the aircraft, they could make them reappear somewhere and fly a fake flight path right into the building. But they were actually on the ground. So they were able to make things appear and disappear on radar for both the FAA and NORAD. They run two different radar systems. So after the book came out, I have been given a terabyte of radar text from NORAD and the FAA and all the wave files from all the communications that took place that day. Most of it's been manipulated, but I'm hoping that we find something that maybe they forgot to cover up. But that's how they were able to hide them on radar. At one point on that day on 9/11, there were 22 faked aircraft hijackings. So air traffic controllers in the Northeast were completely scrambled. They had no idea what was real and what was make-believe. Even when they called NORAD and said, we have a hijacking, they asked, is it real or is it part of the, war game?
And there are more details that we want to uncover, and we're going to do that in the second hour. We're going to take a break here. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes. We'll run some music and come back on the other side for an extended segment with my guest, Rebekah Roth, Methodical Illusion. Rebekah, as we're going out of this hour, let people know about your website and where they can find that and find your book as well.
Sure, the book's everywhere, and you have to order it, but Amazon's got it. All the bookstores can order it for you. It delivers in about a week. You can buy an autographed copy off my website, which is just www.methodicalillusion.com. And there's a place where you can follow me on Facebook, too. So if you have questions, because afterwards, a lot of people want to know what was real, what was part of the fiction, and what all was real. So you're welcome to contact me through email.
And we will be back shortly for the next segment of Off Planet Radio Live.
Understanding. You are entering the place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits. There are no boundaries. This is Off Planet Radio. Back to hour number 2. Off Planet Radio. Off Planet Radio Live. We are going out at offplanetradio.net and through the Liberty Beacon Media Network at tlbtowncrier.com, our network affiliate that we're launching very slowly right now, but like a lot of things that are being done in alternative media, we work with limited resources in terms of manpower. We won't even go to finances. But I got to say thank you to those who have been donating as well. You folks are generous in helping keep this thing going. We're, 6 years now running with Off Planet Radio. And I'm very happy to say that I've been supported over the years by the listeners. No commercials, and basically we're just putting it out. And it's very gratifying. And thank you. I'm humbled by your sustaining efforts. And just a reminder, next week again, live Friday night, February 20th, L.B. Bork will be here. The Red Amendment, you're going to find out about the subversion of the American Republic going back nearly 150 years. And so this thing has been in play for a long time, and it is important that we understand history and that we understand current events. And my guest tonight presents what I will just call a template, because I think once you understand what happens with 9/11, you're now equipped to understand all of the other false flag events that are being foisted upon us. There's a meltdown that occurs when you hit this moment,
and I know my guest is shaking her head right now because she gets it. You're going to hit that moment when you go, and pardon my French, holy shit, they really are doing this. For me, it was Sandy Hook. I covered Sandy Hook live, blogging about it, and when I uncovered the crisis actress who was interviewed by Diane Sawyer on ABC News and presented to us as a second-grade school teacher, and I found her ringer through Crisis Actors database, I went, crap, they've been doing this a long time, haven't they? And then you go, oh man, we'll go back to the Kennedy assassination. We'll go back even further because history is replete with this. False flags are not new. And I want to welcome back my guest, Rebekah Roth, to, flesh out the rest of the story of what really happened. We went into a lot of great details in that first hour, Rebekah, and I really want to give you the space to unfold this because I think people need to hear it. The book is Methodical Illusion, and the website is methodicalillusion.com. Welcome back, Rebekah.
Well, thank you. Well, we left off with how did they manage to make those fake radar blips, and how did they manage to fool us all and hide those planes that they took over remotely? And how did I figure this out? I kept going back to the information that was given to me on all of the phone calls. And we talked about Flight 11 with the 2 flight attendants calling in. I did the same thing with every phone call from each flight. And then I mapped it out, and then I took the National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA documentation that had been released on those flights, and I put the attitude and altitude and what the plane was doing on the same timeline as those phone calls were supposed to be being made. And now I've had lots of people tell me that they were friends with a lot of the crew members. That part, these were not fake. The people that jumped out of the towers, they were not fake people. They were real people. Lots of people really died. They just didn't die the way they showed us on television. And so for me, I kept going back, why isn't the crew doing what they're supposed to? Why aren't they saying the code words? Why aren't they using the whole protocol that was set in stone? And then I realized that if the flight termination system had taken over, the pilots, keep in mind now, this is a coast-to-coast flights, they would have thought there was something mechanically wrong with their plane. They would never in a million years dreamed that this flight termination system would be taken over and hijacking them. It would just never have occurred to them. Maybe now it will, but at that time on September 11th, they would never have dreamed it. They would have been busy thinking, why are we starting a descent? And then another thing that I kept going back to is, why would the flight attendant working 3R, which is the back galley, why would she want to call the pilots when 18 minutes into the flight? Because really, her duties would have been not to call the pilots at all. That's the flight attendant up above in first class, the lead or purser. And so I thought, well, why is she saying that she can't call the cockpit? Why would she want to? She should have been stuffing hot omelets into meal carts and cooking coffee and pouring orange juice. And she's on an early morning breakfast flight with 100 passengers. I know what she should have been doing. And I'm like, why would she call? Well, she would call if that plane had started a descent. And it did. And when the remote control took over, they were landed. And of course, she obviously needed to get this word out. The importance of these cell phone calls was so vital. And when we were talking about how the media manipulated our minds, they're mind manipulators, and how we all got on with our Super Bowl, give me the red, white, and blue, and give me my flag, and put it on my car, and put it on my suitcase, and that's my team. Let's go kill people now. And they had to give us an enemy. And as I keep going back to the details in these phone calls, I saw things that just didn't ring true. On one flight, Flight 175, a passenger, 32-year-old guy, says an airline hostess has been stabbed. Oh, we've never been called airline hostesses. That's something that's used in the Middle East and in Asia. But we've been flight attendants from 1968 on. And before that, we were stewardesses. And every once in a while, you might call us a stewardess, but you would never, if you're an American, call us. I thought, well, who's writing this script? So what I started to do is to take down each person that made a phone call and each terminology, every word that they used. And a lot of them said this, we're in the air. Like they were trying to convince somebody on the other end of the phone call that they were actually in the air. And I said, well, if you're hijacked, of course you're in the air. So why would you say that? Well, because they were being told to say that. Why would this guy call the flight attendant? Now, he was only 32, so since he was 5 or 6, he'd been hearing us referred to as flight attendants and not barely stewardesses, unless he hung out with his grandparents maybe. But I was like, that's just crazy. And then he calls back. And so those phone calls that he makes are really interesting. He calls back at 9 o'clock. This is on Flight 175 that we are to believe went into the South Tower. At 9 o'clock, that's 3 minutes before impact. He is over Manhattan, Hudson River, Newark. He's got to see this. This is, I mean, if you've flown in and out of Newark, you know what you're looking at, right?
Exactly.
And so he calls his dad, and he's at 9 o'clock now, 3 minutes before impact, and he says, Dad, I think they're going to fly our plane, the hijackers are going to fly our plane to Chicago and fly us into a building. And now how would he know that? This is 14 minutes after something flew into the North Tower. And then I realized all of these people making these phone calls either know what the scenario is or have been told by someone on that plane what is going to happen. Now, as I keep digging into these details of these flight phone calls, there's another guy that calls in at 9 o'clock. This is really interesting. He's an F-14 fighter pilot, 6'2", 225 pounds. Keep in mind the hijackers were all about 5'6" to 5'8". This guy was a Top Gun fighter pilot trained in Miramar, California at the Top Gun school. He had flown sorties and missions over in the Gulf War in 91. F-14 pilot. He's a pilot. 44 minutes out of Boston, he calls his mom at 9 o'clock and she says, well, where are you? Because he says, we've been hijacked. It's not going well. He doesn't tell any details about the hijackers or anything else. She said, well, where are you? And he says, we're over Ohio. This is 3 minutes before impact. This is a F-14 pilot who can't recognize Manhattan. And I'm like, what? And then keep in mind also that anybody that knows anything at all, between Boston and Cleveland, which is really close to the Ohio border, Cleveland, Ohio, it's just over the border from Boston, that direction from these. It's an hour and 45 minutes. So here we got a pilot telling his mother that he can't recognize Manhattan 3 minutes before impact. He's right there. And then he tells her they're over rural Ohio. Now, how could that be? And so I started to think, okay, well, there aren't Arab hijackers on board. There are people that know the scenario. And then he said to his mother at 9 o'clock, a bunch of us are thinking about taking over the cockpit. Now, that's Flight 93's scenario. Right, Remember? Right, yeah. Todd Beamer, let's roll. Todd Beamer, right. So, again, I see that this guy knows the scenario of what's going to play out in Flight 93. We're going to take over the cockpit. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is really crazy. Well, that's what I did. I just took all of these things in great detail, and I read every transcript and everything I could find on every one of the phone calls that came out that day from all the people. And so one of the things I found in Flight 93, for example, they were all emotion-filled calls. Honey, I love you. Tell the kids I'm going to miss them. This is a flight attendant now who leaves a message on her home recorder. At 9:47, they have been hijacked for 20 minutes or so. They're going to crash around 5 after 10. You hear nothing in the background. There's nothing going on. So I look and see what's going on when she calls and talks to her husband. She's also an ex-cop. She'd been a police officer for 6 years. And so you got to know this about flight attendants. We would never in a million years give you, the passenger, control of a situation. We are trained, highly trained, to take control of
I've
every
seen that
situation.
many times in flights,
And
yes.
so you know. I mean, any
it's
flight
all
attendant
about controlling the game.
Exactly. And what was really weird about Flight 93, not where only were all the phone calls just totally emotion filled. It was, we're going to die. I'm sorry. I love you. The key to my safe can be found. And all the people on the other end, on the receiving end, mentioned one thing. They said, well, we didn't hear any sound or screaming. We didn't hear any jets. It was like they were in the room next to us. It was just very quiet and calm. Their voice was very calm. Some of them never mentioned any hijackers, just that they'd been hijacked, but they didn't describe who it was. And so when I grab all of these calls and I set them on this chart, I find the National Transportation Safety Board claiming that the plane is now coming out of the sky 6,000 to 10,000 feet a minute. Now, if you've ever been in an emergency descent because you had a decompression, that's pretty darn fast to come out. You would be fighting G-forces bad you wouldn't be holding a phone, let alone would you be speaking in that phone saying, honey, tell the kids I love them, I'll see you in heaven. No, you would hear in the background this aircraft shuddering so loud and other people would be screaming. Now, over the years, 30 years is a long time to spend in a jet, so I've had lots of experiences. And what happens when let's just say you hit some turbulence and it's clear out, and all of a sudden your plane drops 1,000 feet. Boom! It's just like being in a roller coaster, only on steroids, right? Everybody, including the crew members, go, woo! Like that all at once. And if there's 100 or 200 people, they all do it at the same time. And it's like you would hear people. And if you were going down in a descent from 40,000 feet down to 19,000 feet in a 10-minute period, you would not be sitting like Jeremy Glick, for example, who is a judo champion. 6'2", 225, 230 pounds, a judo champion, 30 years old. And what did he do? Instead of taking care of these 5'6" hijackers that we are supposed to believe were on board, he sat and talked to his wife on the phone.
Let me just interrupt you here for a second. In a hijack scenario, in any situation where you have an aggressive action going on, you have two forces. You have the provocateurs, who are obviously going to be moving very quick, doing exactly what you described the flight crew is doing, wrestling control of that situation. There's going to be loud shouting, aggressive actions. There's going to be confusion, chaos, panic, and all the emotional things that play into any situation that's highly charged. I mean, I've seen situations like this, just thank God, not in the air. And I'm thinking, in the mind of people who hear this, even people who are not like yourself, well-versed in the protocols of what goes on an airliner, but anybody who stops and thinks about it for a minute, none of this makes any sense. My first question after 9/11, after the emotionalism wore off, was, how in the hell does anybody with a box cutter take over an entire airplane? Look, I fly enough. I know who's in the air. Every flight, there are military people. Every flight I've ever been on, somebody. There are police officers. There are men, big men, burly men, manly men. And they would not sit there and allow, as you've described it, 5'4" people to take over an airplane with something they got at Staples.
That's right. That's very true. And another thing about Flight 93 that's really oddball as a flight attendant, and I've had this conversation with lots of the gals that have contacted me afterwards, in between the captain and the co-pilot, there's about a 2-foot square box. It's the flight computer. And that computer does not do well with liquids on it. So when we would go into the cockpit and the captain sits on the left-hand side, and we would hand him a glass of, or a cup of coffee or a glass of juice or something, it went over his left shoulder, clear over by that window that wraps around his left shoulder. And we would say, Captain, here's your coffee to the left. If we panded it over that flight computer and a teaspoon of liquid came out, we could have a serious China syndrome effect on board our aircraft. That's the flight control computer. You don't want to get water on it.
Right.
And so remember on Flight 93, the flight attendants completely let the crew members, Todd Beamer, Jeremy Glick, Mark Bingham. Hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham. Remember him? He used his first and last name when he called his mother. And some other guy, I can't remember. It seems like there were 4 of them, go up this 22-inch wide, narrow aisle. The 757 has one of the narrowest aisles of all. It's like 24 inches from seat back to seat back. These big gorilla guys now are going to go up with full coffee pots of water or hot coffee and take the cockpit that way. And I'm like, what? How in the world would, first off, no flight attendants are ever going to let a passenger, let alone a group of passengers, take control. We have protocol steps to follow. You are never going to get in there with pots of water because there's a computer there. And if there was any hope of getting anybody in there that could fly the plane, if you were to believe the hijackers were in the cockpit, they definitely wouldn't succeed if you dropped 4 pots of coffee on the flight computer. And that whole scenario was so crazy. When I put all the pieces of the puzzle together, which is why I ended up putting it on the cover, this is the missing piece. The logic of a flight attendant and the things that would never happen didn't happen. This is what I said to my husband. If the perpetrators who planned this and executed this event would have just consulted with a flight attendant, they could have not gotten caught. But since they didn't use our protocol, they didn't use our code words, they didn't do what they were supposed to do, the pilots didn't do what they were supposed to do, simple to squawk the hijack code, nothing happened the way it was supposed to happen in a hijacking. Then I went back to Betty Ong. She said these words, I don't know, but we might be being hijacked. Well, if you have a hijacker on board, you know it. Because they have a demand and they're in the aisle and they've usually got a flight attendant by the neck and they're saying, take me to Cuba or whatever that demand is. So how could she possibly have said, I don't know?
Not only that, but you know and I know that on an airplane, the flight crew, I mean, I've watched flight crews as they work. It's almost telepathic. I mean, they're so well choreographed. Most of these crews look like they work together, really well, like seamlessly. And the awareness level, they're very observant. I've watched flight crews interact with passengers. I've watched passengers, let's just say, suspicious moves, dumb things that people do, and they're very quick to pick it up. They're reading constantly. Mm-hmm. So none of this makes sense. That's part of our training.
Yeah, part of our training. As a matter of fact, a lot of the flight attendants have contacted me, have said, well, leave it to a flight attendant to figure out how this whole thing came down. And I always knew, this is another thing they say, I always knew the official story wasn't true, wasn't possible, and leave it to a flight attendant. And one of the gals said to me just a couple days ago, we're trained. And after 30 years of training every year, we're trained to spot suspicious people, suspicious actions, and we are in total control. And we're synchronized German Shepherds. I mean, we pay attention to what you're doing, whether you know it or not. We've got an eye on all of you. I mean, that's what we do. We are trained to do that to keep everybody safe. And so that's what I did. I guess in looking in the 9/11 stuff, I went into this with an open mind and just logic, pure logic, and looking from what would I be doing. I tell people I put my flight attendant shoes on instead of my big girl panties, how they say. I put my flight attendant shoes back on. I pulled them out of the closet, and I walked those aisles of every one of those flights. And I thought, what would I be doing 18 minutes after departure from Boston, going to the West Coast? What would I be doing if I was Betty Ong? What would I be doing? What would the pilots be doing? Why would I call up there? Why would I want to call there? Why would I call reservations? And by the way, the media has tried to say that, well, the American flight attendants always called reservations, not in a hijacking. I'm sorry. And every single one of those girls that has come forward to me has said that was the weirdest thing I heard. The whole detail was that this girl called reservations because you were always on hold. There was no direct line that got you right there. It wasn't an emergency line. It was crazy. And I remember that day hearing that one of the flight attendants called an air traffic control tower, and that was scrubbed later. I never could find that again. But I remember thinking that morning, because I listened to every detail like a German Shepherd, I was like, well, how would she have a phone number for an air traffic control tower? That's not something we associate with our world. And probably most of the pilots wouldn't even have a phone number for that. So I thought that was really a strange thing. And it just kind of disappeared, that little bit of information. But the places people called, and like if I'm in a hijacking, the last thing I'm going to do is call my mom and dad. On my cell phone, which happened on Flight 77. There were 2 calls out of the Pentagon plane. It was Barbara Olson, who called her husband from her cell phone, and also this Renee May, who was a flight attendant, called her parents in Las Vegas. And I'm like, why would you call your mom and dad? I mean, of all the people, why would you do that? That's not protocol. That's not right. And why would you even make a phone call? Maybe if you could hide in the bathroom, maybe you would do that. But all these things were just not working for me. So that's kind of what I did. And then what I found, and I teach the reader how to do this. I don't know if you've gotten to this part yet, Randy, but what I did was I mapped out all these charts of what time the phone calls were made. Because, you see, this information had to come out to the media. Or if Al-Qaeda really had just taken over Flight 77, it's not 10 miles away from the Pentagon. Why would they fly for an hour and 40 minutes and take the chance of being shot down by a scrambled F-16 or whatever they're going to scramble? I mean, anybody that knows how our system works, they would never in their right mind take an airplane and fly all the way to Timbuktu and back to hit the Pentagon, and they just took off across the river from it. And so I started to see things that were just so illogical. I mean, it's like Mohammed Atta expected. We were supposed to believe he flew that morning on an early morning flight up to Portland, Maine, and then came back. He had like 15 minutes to connect out of Logan. That's crazy. Anybody that's gone through Logan.
That's like the miracle connection right there.
Yes, exactly. And so that's why his luggage didn't make it. You see, they made that whole story why his luggage with the Koran and the flight manuals and all this crazy stuff that really belonged to the other guy they tried to blame him. So I started to see things, and then as I dug into the FBI information that had been put in the 9/11 Commission and also into the Zachariah Moussaoui trial, the 20th hijacker, hell, there weren't 19 of them. So how could he be the 20th? And what about those poor guys in Gitmo? They had nothing to do with this. Nothing. There is not one Arab name on one passenger manifest. And I've actually been contacted by someone that has the real passenger manifest.
Whoa.
And so it's out there. The real thing is out there. Yes, it is. There's more than one smoking gun, by the way. And what's happened since the book came out, and I did a couple interviews, is people that were actually at the location where I tell in the book where the planes were taken remotely and landed, and have reconfirmed my theory. And that's really earth-shattering. So it's very interesting what's happening, and the whole truth movement now is in play. And there's a whole bunch of people. I mean, I am now in contact with people that are aeronautical engineers, pilots, physics professors, research scientists that are coming forward with information, military people that know a lot of stuff was going on that day and where it was going on. And so, I mean, what's happened to my life is, since the book came out, is absolutely, I mean, can almost not find words for it. It's just incredible. I say the cosmic egg of 9/11 truth has been cracked open. Mm-hmm. And in the people that have really been in the movement, that are, in San Diego in the truth movement, they're marching on the streets and down there at the USS Midway, people that are really trying to wake other people up have just, I mean, they're just shocked. They just say, you have found that missing piece of the puzzle and you figured it all out. And I just kept using my logic and, of course, my, career. But what I found also in some of the things that were said on those phone calls, who says this? He's of Middle Eastern descent. If I were to describe you, Randy, I would never say, oh, he's of Middle Eastern descent. That was one of the things that almost every phone caller said. I'm like, how would you tell somebody that's from Turkey or Iran apart from somebody that's from Costa Rica or Mexico? Because,
well,
I mean,
that
you're
is
just
actually
lying.
part of the problem. As you well know, people coming across the southern border can emanate from anywhere, and we don't actually know the nationality of people based on how they look or even how they dress. But, the surface level judgment is this would be a person with darker color skin that speaks with an accent that has a certain look to them. But to be able to judge specifically by country or even geophysical location within the Middle East, that's really a stretch.
As a matter of fact, the judo champion that sat and talked to his wife on the phone the whole time instead of kick butt on these little guys, he claimed that the hijackers were Iranian. Well, how could he know that? If he was sitting on the phone talking to his wife, what did he do? Get their ID cards? I mean, that's craziness right there. But you see, again, we were talking about how the illusion was painted for these people. This was methodically done. It is an illusion, and it all had to come to you and me. We had to know who the enemy was, and if they weren't allowed to make these cell phone calls to tell us they were Middle Eastern. They were Middle Eastern. Do you know that's a lot of countries? We're bombing 7 to 12 different Middle Eastern countries right now on an illusion. You think about that. Because these guys, these 10 of them were still alive. 9 of them, professionals now that I'm chatting with, feel that the other 9 were completely make-believe. Like I was going to go to the list of the 19 hijackers and grab a name, a first name from one and a last name from another one, and create a character for my novel. That's exactly what the other 9 were. Complete fakes. Yeah. And they weren't on the manifest either. So it was an illusion. And we are now on the verge of a huge war. Again, we're talking about ground troops going into Iraq. They are troops into Syria. We'll go into Iran next. It's crazy what is going on, and it is all for the reason. And the end of my book talks about this, if you're not aware of it, for the New World Order and the worldwide tyranny. And so when people say to me, well, why'd you write a book about 9/11? Well, for one thing, it blew me away to find out what I found. And for another reason, this past is our future. The minute 9/11 happened, the minute the flags rolled out, we chose our team. We were signing up to go kill people that we didn't even have any proof of that had any involvement, except people sitting on a television telling us within an hour that this was Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden also went by Tim Osman. He's a CIA asset. 2 months before 9/11 happened, he got delivered $2 billion worth of goods, military goods, from our government. So, I mean,
well,
people
not
just
to
don't
mention
know.
the fact that the bin Laden family was in business with the Bush family in Texas. There was the mysterious death of the one brother as he was winging out of Austin. The fact that the bin Laden family apparently were the only people in the nation who could fly on 9/11, and the entire family and their entourage were flown out of the country under cover of military. And the most interesting thing of all, we have Middle Eastern terrorists, so we're going to war with Afghanistan. Oh, of course, because you got to finance the war, and, well, heroin's big business.
Yes, it is.
And now we're back to Oliver North and that whole Iran-Contra scenario, which everything just folds over.
It's all intertwined, and that's one of the things I found. I tell people, listen, my 9/11 research took me to Babylon, and then I went on to the Garden of Eden, and that's where this thing stems from. I mean, it goes way back. And so it's not only is it our past, and it's also all the false flags. They're all somehow related, and you'll start to see things. And I tell people this, and this happened to me. So I was in what's called cognitive dissonance, and I know some people think I don't say that correctly, but I know what it is. I can see the letters in my mind. I guess I talk too fast sometimes. They think I don't pronounce it correctly.
You actually said it correctly. So,
but I mean, I can find people that listen to an interview and that's what they dive in on. Okay, they don't care where the planes are, what happened to the passengers. That the 9/11 truth movement right now is so alive that I can't even tell you all the stuff that's going on. It's so major, and so many people are so full of hope that this is that it's been figured out and that people are coming forward, but. When people say to me, well, why would you write about 9/11? That's just in the past. And those are the people that need to wake up, because the past is your future. And right after 9/11, you'll remember the the TSA showed up. And remember, they started taking your shoes off, and then they took your computers, and now they're taking your computers apart. You have to take the batteries out, put it back in, and make a phone call or use it if you're going internationally. The naked body scanners after the panty bomber who was put on the aircraft, Northwest Airlines, by a CIA asset with no passport. Nobody can get on a plane. I don't know how they handled the flight attendant at the door, because you cannot get past the ticket agent and past the flight attendant at the door without your documents. I'm sorry. How did they do that? Well, there was a CIA handler with them and just looked at these are not the drones you're looking for. I guess that's kind of what happened that day. And then, unfortunately for them, a lot of people saw the handler and they saw what was going on, and then when the bomb thing didn't work, but immediately Michael Chertoff, again another popular name, around the whole 9/11
citizen
thing.
By the way.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
And so is the comptroller of the Pentagon.
Sure.
And also what he had, Michael Chertoff was ready right after the panty bomber with the naked body scanning machines. He had them all ready. They were delivered immediately. And so another thing about the Pentagon comptroller I haven't talked about yet, but he was involved with another group of people that did something else really interesting surrounding the whole event of 9/11. He had a company out of Elgin Air Force Base in Florida, I believe. Mm-hmm. Was where it was based. And what they did, this might give you the chills, but if you don't know this, you need to. Their company took commercial 767s and refurbished them into military refueling tankers, and they were sold to militaries all around the world. So people ask, well, what happened to the planes? Well, somewhere there's probably a refueling tanker that they got for free that has been delivered to more than likely a foreign country.
Let me take you back a little bit, because I know we've got some more ground to cover. We've covered all the evidence about the flights that did not hit the buildings, and the scenarios that were played out, what we assume were the scripts that were run that day, the telephone calls. Mm-hmm. Now we have to deal with the reality of the situation, which is there were real people on those planes. Mm-hmm. There was real crews on those planes, and those planes clearly did not arrive where they were supposed to go. They went somewhere. And my first question is, based on the evidence that you've offered so far, Rebekah, in your opinion, were they abducted, were they held, and was this script run either knowingly or unknowingly by all of the actors, all of the people who were making the phone calls, and what was basically the script and the dialogue that you presented as evidence so far? What do you believe really happened there?
All 8 of the pilots were military pilots, mm-hmm. And since I finished the book and connected with lots of American employees, I know lots more about the personalities of all the flight attendants and the pilots involved. And what we have concluded is that since the military war games were going on, and there was like a dozen, some people say there were 20, I don't know how many there really were going on, but we know that 2 really big ones that all the military guys knew, and a couple of the pilots were still in the reserves. So when the pilots go through the system to check out, they go into what's called flight operations, and they make their flight plan, where they're going to go and what places they're going to check in with, what airspace are going to be in at a certain time, and what they get weather's there. If there's thunderstorms, they have to deviate around. So they get their flight plan down in operations. At that time, we are beginning to think now that more than likely they were told that there was Vigilant Guardian going on, the war game that was going on. So they might hear radio chatter or some type of thing, but that's because there's this drill going on. If they would have been told that, then once the plane was taken over remotely, the handlers, once they landed on the ground, probably told them that they were part of a military drill.
Okay, so this would have been a military drill, clearly, because DHS didn't exist at that point.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so there were military drills going on, and that's what PTEC and the MITRE company were doing, and making these fake bogies appear and disappear on the radar screens. So we're thinking that because of the personalities and the passengers, or the crew members, the pilots and the flight attendants, they had to have been told by a handler on board that we are doing a drill and we're testing FAA or NORAD, and we want we're going to take you and you off the plane. And I believe they took those two flight attendants off the plane, and that they were actually in two different rooms. That's why they were telling us they were in the same row of coach seats, and then one was saying she was in a jump seat. They didn't know what they were saying. And that's why when people said, well, where are you? What do you see out the window? Well, they didn't know what to say. They should have said Manhattan. They should have said, well, we're over in New York, because any flight attendant would know that. And so when, they didn't know. And as a matter of fact, Betty Ong was asked several times, what seat are you in? And she must have been asked that maybe 8 times. And she just couldn't figure out where she was. And you know where you're at. I mean, come on. If somebody asks you where you're at, you're sitting where you're at your microphone at your studio. And so she didn't know what to say, and it was really obvious. So she just finally then just kept going back to, well, I'm in my jump seat at 3 right or 3R, and Betty, she didn't know that her coworker was saying she was sitting next to her in the last row coach. So they had to have been somewhere else. This is what we think. And then this is a scenario that we have to use the personalities of the captain, the co-pilot, and the flight attendants that were on those planes. And that's what we're using. We figure that the handlers collected, or they used a cell phone jammer, so that nobody could phone out once they were on the ground. And that wouldn't take much of a jammer. And there were a lot of people that were specialists in communication, and even Raytheon electronic warfare people were on board those flights. So they easily could have used a jammer so nobody could phone. And remember that the Illuminati, they love to tell you the details with, right in plain sight. And one of the things they all said right away in those phone calls was they had mace or pepper spray. And so what we think is that the people that they needed to take to use the phone calls, they were taken off the plane in the hangar and went upstairs to an office. So on flight 11, it was 2 people. On flight 175, it was 3 people. On flight 77, it was 2 people. You see how easy would it be for the handler to say you and you off the plane? Isolated. The rest of those people were gassed. And we figure something easy that's readily available where they were, like hydrogen cyanide. And it will take people down in about 3 minutes. Another thing that Peter Hansen said on Flight 175 is that they'd sprayed pepper spray or mace or something, and people were vomiting.
Oh,
and that indicates something stronger than pepper spray. Yeah. And so listening to all of these details, I'm telling you, I wrote these things down. I put them on charts. I studied every word, and I was looking, and all I kept finding was Hollywood cue cards. I mean, how could people say this? And this is 3 minutes before impact. They put mace in there. Well, the pilots wouldn't. Whoever was at the controls couldn't even breathe if you pepper spray or mace the cabin, because it goes in the cockpit door too. And there's a crack underneath the door. It's not like it's airtight or anything. And So even if it was hijackers at the helm up there, they would be pepper sprayed or gassed as well. So that's why I think, and then what happened with Flight 93? Flight 93 was brought in and they needed to grab your emotions. And the illusion that was painted, we knew the enemy was Middle Eastern descent, maybe Iranian, one guy even said. So they painted the picture of who these enemies were that we were to hate, and then they grabbed our emotion with every phone call that came in on Flight 93 was something to the effect of, honey, things aren't going well. We've been hijacked. Tell the kids I love them and I'll see you in heaven. All of this supposedly going on while the aircraft is coming out of the sky, 6,000 to 10,000 feet a minute. I don't think so. So you see what I saw? Was impossibilities. And so when I see pepper spray and mace everywhere, and I know what would happen in a pressurized cabin, it just told me they had to have been on the ground. So I teach the reader how to do this. There's actually a website, and it's real. In that novel, there's a lot of truth. And once you get into the 9/11 truth stuff, it's all real. When you can go to this website, and what I did was, well, of course, the first two flights came out of Boston. That was easy to figure that one out. And then I took Flight 77 from Dulles in Washington, D.C., and figured out that flight time. And that is exactly a minute to 2 minutes prior to Barbara Olson phoning. And I was like, oh my, that just literally turned my stomach over. And then Flight 93. Now, keep it in mind that these planes were on the ground by 8:18, 8:35, 9:10, and somewhere again, Flight 93 would have come in between 9:10, maybe 9:15. So you see, we've got 15 minutes, and then we've got about 40 minutes between another plane coming in. And remember, these were pretty light loads. So they had to take care of the people quickly. That's why we all think that the phone call people were removed, the gas was thrown in, everybody else was pretty much dead. And that would explain why someone would say they were vomiting. Because unless you're really hit hard with pepper spray or mace, you wouldn't be vomiting. You would be coughing, choking, your eyes would be watering, but that's not the effect of that kind of gas. So that's the kind of stuff I kept doing, was just looking back at that. And so all of those planes would have been taken to that area by probably no later than 9:20. And so the first phone call from Flight 93 was made at, this is interesting too, at 9:27. Tom Burnett calls his wife. She's a retired flight attendant. She calls in on his cell phone, and it shows up on her caller ID. And right away, she picks up the phone just like I would. And she says, well, Tom, are you okay? Aren't you on your flight? And he says, yeah, I'm in the air. Again, they say that we're up in the air. We've been hijacked. And her mind, flight attendant that she is, says, no, you're calling on your cell. You can't be in the air. I mean, that's just the way it works, because we knew it wasn't going to be a cell phone call. And so he calls her about 4 times from that plane, and tells her there's a gun on board. And then the FBI comes to her and tells her, no, that couldn't have been. She's like, hey, listen, the guy's had guns all of his life since he was a Cub Scout, so he knows what a gun is. And they start arguing with her, and they start telling her that he didn't call from his cell phone, and all this kind of crazy stuff like that I saw in there. But here's the trick. He calls at 9:27 to his wife and says they've been hijacked. The aircraft wasn't officially hijacked until 1 minute later, at 9:28, according to the official FAA documents. So the pilots are talking to the FAA air traffic controllers at the same time this guy is calling his wife from coach and saying they're hijacked. And well, let me tell you a secret about passengers. Love them, but they don't they don't know what's going on in the plane unless we tell them through a PA, and usually it takes 2 or 3 times. Because they've got their headsets on, they're into a movie, they've got their DVD player, they're sound asleep, or have earplugs in, they don't want to hear, they've got their Bose sound destroying headsets on, so they can't hear anything. And so I'm thinking, well, how in the world would a guy in the cabin know a minute before the pilots, even while the pilots are talking to air traffic control, that they've been hijacked? Well, that just doesn't make any sense at all. And so there were about maybe close to a dozen people that actually made calls from the group of passengers. There were about 33 passengers on Flight 93. All of the 33 passengers, and there were some 30-ish phone calls too, and some of them made calls. Like Tom Burnett made 4 or 5 calls.
What were they using to make calls, or what were they alleged to be using? Were these
most of them were cell phones, and that flight was in the air. It was, according to the National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA, it was at 39,000 feet, 45 minutes into their flight.
Really?
And all of them were reported to be cell phones. And the very first guy who called his wife, Tom Burnett, he called his wife the retired flight attendant. He was definitely his cell.
Well, how realistic is that at 39,000 feet
they
to be able to hit a terrestrial-based system?
Impossible. So that told me they were on the ground. And so that told me they were on the ground by 9:27. And for some reason, this guy magically knew before the pilots that they were hijacked a minute before. And no flight attendants called out until 9:47 and 9:52. Mm-hmm. And so we got one passenger in the back that's calling his wife, telling them that they've been hijacked. They're in the air long before any flight attendants attempt to call or do anything else. So, I mean, there were just so many things, but all of the calls on Flight 93 were just to grab our emotion. That's all that was. And if we didn't know who the enemy was, if Al-Qaeda really did hijack those planes, they could have just flown them into the targets. We wouldn't be in war right now in the Middle East because we had to know who the enemy was. And you see, if you look back at those flags coming out and you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, and you can look back now at all those shows and see how manipulated we all were. And so what's happening now also is that it's almost like we were all hypnotized to believe this illusion. And people now are waking up and starting to use their common sense. So when I talk to people about the impossibility of making a cell phone call, they had to have been on the ground. And the flight time works. And what was going on and the inaccuracies. Why were people not following the protocols and doing what they should have been doing? And because they didn't know. That's why. And so you wouldn't know. And so people now are just going, wow, you put it all together. And they can start to see. And what I tell people, too, when you wake up to the 9/11 truth, I don't care if you did this in 2006, if you did it on day one, I get a lot of people that tell me they knew from the minute it happened that this was a JFK assassination kind of false flag, Operation Northwood thing all over again. Now, I didn't really look into it until 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. I mean, I just didn't. But boy, let me tell you this. When that veil is lifted on the 9/11 truth, when you see things like Charlie Hebdo in Paris, and you see that the terrorist is handling his weapon like a trained assassin. You know who those trained assassins are. By the way, Benjamin Netanyahu is also a member of Sayeret Matkal, as so is Ehud Barak, who is also a prime minister of Israel, also as Sayeret Matkal. These are trained assassins. Think about that for a minute. Now, would you vote for somebody that's a trained assassin if he ran for president of the United States? I mean, would you just stop and think, wow? I mean, okay. That's pretty amazing to me that we are expected to just let that one go. These are not the drones you're looking for. You know, just like Star Wars guy. I mean, these are not the drones. This is the elephant in the room you can't speak about. But it's all there. And if you follow down all the tracks. Now, on 9/11, there was tons of stuff that went on besides these airplanes being remotely controlled and taken somewhere. There was gold stolen from vaults underneath Building 4 and 6. Yeah. The Enron investigation and the WorldCom and Global Crossing investigations were all being done, and the evidence was being held in the North Tower, and I believe it was floor number 24, and the Building 7. And so the Building 7 had to come down because of all of the stuff that was in there, and a lot of the stuff from Enron and WorldCom point right back to some really big politicians, both sides of the aisle. This is not a Republican or a Democrat thing. This is a monster. I call it the octopus, and it is intertwined in everything that is going on. The company that I found in the FAA headquarters, that MITRE company, they are in everything. I just noticed the time. We just keep going.
No, we're fine. And like I said, we can stretch on this. I want to give you the space to be able to fully unload. Because I know, listen, I both know and appreciate the depth of commitment it takes for you to do these interviews. And see, we're not mass media. We can't beam this out on a satellite, bounce it to 5 continents, and have instant coverage. The method that this media has to use is basically one at a time. We're putting it out there, and we shovel it out onto YouTube, and we shovel it out into streams, and sometimes it gets taken down, and sometimes, websites get hacked. But the bottom line is that we're mercenary ants right now, in the sense that that's what we're doing. So I want you to have the time to unpack this. But the most shocking aspect of this to me is looking back. And I mean, I was a skeptic of the JFK thing, probably 80s and 90s. I woke up to that. I already knew a lot of other things, even from childhood, but it took me that long to unpack that. I now realize that we look at the trail of blood that I think goes from Waco to Kansas City to the World Trade Center and has continued. And then on top of that, the fact that this show has in recent weeks put out documents issued by very high-level investors indicating the stolen trillions that were used to finance Homeland Security. We know that PNAC,
it's a project for the New American Century.
Yeah.
Called for a new Pearl Harbor.
Which was basically the neocon Zionist so-called Christian militant wing that flew into power with the election of George W. Bush. This was their manifesto for a second Pearl Harbor as a pretext for us to do the adventures that we're doing now, that we've been doing since 1993 in the recent time frame. And all of the terrorist acts, all of the things that are set up are a means to install what we colloquially call the New World Order, the Illuminati system. I call them the Satanists. I call it the Satanic system. And you and I have talked about this. The real payload at the end of this is there's much more at stake. And believe me, it's a lot, because we have too many innocent dead people, collateral damage according to their terms. But we're looking at the future of humanity, beginning here in the United States, but emanating out into the entire world, because the consequences of what happened on 9/11 were so huge that, as you point out in your book, this is not about the past. This is about the future.
It's very true. And it's also a spiritual battle. And I know that some people refer to it as good versus evil, Lucifer against God. It's a scenario that's played out. Some people like to refer to them as aliens, and it's easier for you to think of aliens being greys versus reptilians or whatever. But it doesn't matter what you call it; it's all the same. And one of the things that I got involved in my research was the spiritual aspect and how this is playing over and over and over again through the centuries. And I think what's happening with us now is we are on the verge of total planetary destruction. And the evil force that is this world tyranny that is oftentimes referred to as New World Order. And I know when George Bush Sr. said this as an old grandfatherly figure, it wasn't intimidating. But if people really look at Albert Pike and the Freemasons.
Letters to Mazzini.
Exactly. Yeah. And you look and see the plans for World War III is basically turning the Christian and the Muslim against the Zionist, political Zionist. And of course, they're bringing in the Christian versus Muslim. And so you've got all these factions hating each other, and you see so much hate pushed on the I call it the boob tube, the TV. I mean, you just see so much crazy stuff. We literally turn it on to see what are they trying to program people to do. And right now, in the last month, I would say, since they created this ISIS, that you're just seeing all of this hate. And so what happens? Just the other day, we have these 3 Muslim kids. There were 23, 21, and 19. A dentist and his wife and her younger sister shot dead in the head in their home. Because the guy didn't like the way they parked their car. Well, of course, the first thing they do is they go on his Facebook page, and he's got all this anti-Islam stuff, and it's just insane what's going on in our world. And people need to really realize that the world tyranny, the New World Order is world tyranny. It's worldwide communism. And so maybe that'll help you wake up, because, most of us were raised to understand that communism isn't where we want to go. But the New World Order is a worldwide tyranny. It's total control. And if you look back right now, just take a moment for a second and think about September 10th, 2001, when you were going through an airport. What did you do? You walked through a magnetometer, showed them your boarding pass, went along, and then 5 years before that, your girlfriend or your wife or your kids could come along with you, say goodbye at the gate when you got on the plane at the jetway. Yep. And you look back just at that, and now look what happens now. If you go on an international flight, they make you pull your battery out, start your electronic devices, and show them that they're not bombs. You're not a terrorist, but they're treating you like one. When I flew, I was treated like one. I couldn't keep a tube of toothpaste in my suitcase because they'd squeeze it out every time. I know. I had to buy these little tiny buttons to put my makeup in because they would just squeeze it out if it was in a tube. I was like, I'm going on a 10-day trip, okay? I'd like to have toothpaste. I would get to Tokyo and have to go down to the store and buy toothpaste. Every time I got on my layover, I'd have to go buy toothpaste. It was insane. I'm like, I didn't do this. As a matter of fact, not one flight attendant did do this, but we were treated so horribly, and they did this for the psychological reason. Then we talk about psychology of how they do this. So the illusion would be painted that you were safe because they were treating the crew like this. It's like, if they're going to do that to the pilot and the flight attendants, we must be safe. I mean, that's why they did it. And yet, they would not search people coming home. I had a guy actually complain to me one time. I was commuting on a flight. He had come from Mecca, doing that round-around thing that they do. And he brought 2 large liter pop bottles of water. I guess there's some special water from there to his family back home in the States. And you know what he said to me as I sat down? They had ripped me apart. I'm in my uniform. I just come in from some international trip. I'm wearing my uniform with my purser wings hooked onto me. And I just got ripped apart by security. I sit down next to him and he goes, I have come all the way from Riyadh through Amsterdam here, and now I'm going back one more leg, and not one person has asked me what this liquid is. I can't carry toothpaste, and because he was an Arab, no one could ask him, because that would be that
really pisses me off. My son coming back on a trip from Alaska had snow globes taken from him and thrown in the trash by TSA. I almost that day got arrested.
Oh, it's insane. And I have a girlfriend whose mother was 85, walking, with a walker in a wheelchair. She had a tube of lipstick in her coat pocket, and they almost killed her with a heart attack, attacking her over this metal that was in her pocket. Yeah. She freaked out. She almost had a heart attack over the whole thing. They scared her almost to death. And I saw that over and over and over. And you want to know, will I get on a plane now? No way in hell. And I'll tell you why. Remember the flight termination system?
Oh, yeah.
That only some of the carriers had? In 2006, 2008, somewhere in there, Boeing came up with a patent. George Bush W. made it mandatory that every aircraft in the United States has this autopilot override system. It's basically a remote control on every aircraft we fly. So you wonder what happened to MH370?
Yeah.
How did that happen? We never found any crash site. Well, they did have enough fuel to get to Diego Garcia, which is a drone base, and they did have some very important people on board.
Very important people, very interesting people, and very interesting technology, by the way.
Exactly.
That
and
the
again,
Rothschilds, I believe, were very interested in acquiring. Yeah.
I think they have the patents now. And again, on 9/11, too, after the book came out, I kept researching because I realized that there were more handlers than I thought. And so I kind of like researching some of these people. And the guy that was on Flight 175, the pilot that couldn't figure out where he was when he was over Manhattan 3 minutes before impact, who thought they were going to take over the cockpit. Well, I started looking into him the other day just for fun, having a cup of coffee, just taking a mental vacation.
Oh, do you get to do that?
I'm in his online obituary, and I'm reading down. I'm thinking, well, I couldn't figure out where this guy worked because it wasn't a part of his details. And so, lo and behold, I'm down there about 12 or 15 obituaries where people are writing into his online obituary. And what do they say? Oh, Brian, I remember you from the M cafeteria when we both worked for the Mitre Company, which is based right south of Boston. And then I realized that's the same company. That's really the octopus. That's the shadow government. And that's the same company that sat with PTEC in the FAA headquarters. So that might be why he thought we were going to Ohio, which is an hour and 45-minute flight from Boston in 45 minutes. And that's why I think a lot of us, I did this too originally. I looked at the flight paths that the FAA claimed where the planes were on, and everybody went to Cleveland. They even had a bomb threat on a Delta flight. I think the flight number was 1898. 1898, I think, was the flight number, or 1989 it was. Delta gets a bomb threat. They land in Cleveland. They deplane, and they have to do this. When you have a bomb threat on board, you're not going to go to the jetway. So I think you just saw this down in Houston not long ago. Somebody was tweeting bomb threats, remember, a couple weeks ago? About six of them. And some kid was tweeting them. We never did find out who that was. And it just kind of stopped, remember? And I think they did 6 or 7 tweet bomb threats to Delta a lot and some JetBlue. And there was like 3 or 4 airlines involved. But on a Twitter, which can be easily hijacked and hacked, they land these airplanes. And so when you land with a bomb, of course, or bomb threat, you're parked in what's called remotely. You're not brought up to a jetway, so they bring stairs and they get the people off the plane, and then they have bomb-sniffing dogs as you're getting off the stairs. And then they go through the whole airplane once they get all the passengers in their carry-on luggage sniffed and put into buses and then brought somewhere. So that's kind of the way they handle that. But yeah, this was a bomb threat. And another thing I found in Chicago, United Airlines that morning lost their internet and their telephone service. So they couldn't get any phone calls in. Once their phone line came up, they started getting bomb threats called into them on lots of different planes. So interesting too that a lot of the people that were involved as passengers, that were on board as passengers, were very involved in communication companies, internet and telephone. Yeah. Both here and in Israel.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was very easy. Now, one of the things I found that I put in the book that nobody had ever found, and I found it in an FBI document, are there 2 women involved.
That's
not
big.
19
That's
Arab
big.
Hijackers, but 2 women. You know this, right?
Right.
Do you know how to find this? Let me tell your listeners, because this is really good, and it freaks people out. if you go to Wikipedia and you just Google search CeCe Lyles, Flight 93, 9/11, you'll find her Wikipedia. It's pretty easy. It pops up pretty quick when you put that in, CeCe Lyles, Flight 93. That's all you have to do. There's some players down on the far right lower corner. And one of them is a message that she left on her home recorder. I believe the time was 9:47 a.m. She was on Flight 93 that went into Shanksville. About 10 o'clock, 10:05, 10:06, somewhere in there. There's, again, on that crash, there's at least 5 different times that it crashed. So you either crash at 10:03, you crash at 10:03, but you can't crash at 10:03, 10:06, 10:07, 10:10, or 10:20. There's a crash time. But again, it's like everything else with 9/11. There's this insanity. So anyway, she calls and she leaves a message on her home phone. Now, this is a woman who'd been a police officer for 6 years. She's got a couple young kids at home. She leaves this message for her husband. And when she gets finished, she hands the receiver to someone, and you can clearly hear this. And if you put headsets on, you can hear it even better. You can hear the sound, and it sounds like an old-fashioned receiver, like the kind we used to have on a home phone,
right.
The receiver. Yeah. And it sounds almost like there's, paper or scruffling or, hands touching that receiver of the microphone part. She hands the phone to, obviously, a woman who says at the end of this message, you could hear this shuffling kind of sound of the receiver. She says, "You did great." Now, keep this in mind, that this woman is telling CeCe Lyles, the flight attendant, that she did great, and they are coming out of the sky at 10,000 feet a minute, according to the National Transportation Safety Board. This woman calmly says in a whisper, "You did great." Now you can hear it perfectly. And you can just hear it right there on Wikipedia. It's freaky, and it's there. So who was that woman? And if they were really coming out of the sky 6,000 to 10,000 feet a minute at that moment, who is that woman that sat there so calmly telling a flight attendant that she did great making that phone call? I found her. It's in the book. I found out who she is. It's in the book. It's pointed out pretty clearly.
I think one of the biggest reasons to read the book is to immerse yourself in this. It's not only a work of investigative reporting. It is an immersive form of going into the minds of people in a way that puts you in the psychology. See, Rebekah, one of the things I like about the book is that you've kind of used their tools against them. You've used a fictional form to present, as I said at the beginning of the show, more evidence than we got out of, the whole 9/11 Truth Committee. Gosh, that was a screaming success. That made the Warren Commission look like diehard truthers.
Yeah, no kidding.
So this book, being able to go through it and pull this information out of it and check it and proof it and realize we've had a lot of this evidence sitting in front of us for almost 14 years now. In plain view.
In plain sight. Mm-hmm. I know there's a video about 9/11 called In Plain Sight. Yeah. But you remember we were talking about the Illuminati. They love to do this. They look at the Super Bowl halftime shows for the last 6 or 8 years.
Oh
it's an Illuminati ritual.
Every year.
They love it.
Yep.
They love that.
They did ISIS this year, by the way. Wasn't that great?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really interesting, when you start to put it all together and you go back to Babylon and keep coming back, and you start to see what this Illuminati and their rituals and it's just and so complex and it's so crazy. When I got all the information from 9/11 put together, I just literally had to sit there and think, well, how in the world am I ever going to deliver this to someone and I won't fry their brain? So what I did was I created a character, and his name is Max Hager. And Max is a Vietnam veteran. He wears a fake ponytail, so he fits in with the Occupy type crowd, the younger kids. He is the truther's truther, and every man that reads this book wants to play him in the movie. I mean, he is he's every truther I read. He's everyone I saw in a video. I mean, he's a compilation of every truther that I ran into in all of my investigation. Mm-hmm. And people want to know, is he real? He is. He's all of you. He's every truther out there, and he delivers. He enters into this the whole book, because the flight attendant, of course, she's in cognitive dissonance and doesn't want to know, and she has to, because it's just coming right at her, and she just can't get out of this. I mean, what she discovers and what happens in the whole story, she just can't not get this information. It's coming in at her, and she's just blown away, and she wakes up. And so what I did was I wanted to touch the person who is just maybe starting to question the common sense. I mean, really, are we really believing that a trained assassin that was an anti-hijacking specialist really was taken out by a 1/4-inch box cutter plastic even? And if you look online, you can even see they put it in the Zechariah Moussaoui trial. It is one of those bright yellow plastic ones. I should get one so I can show people. It's not much bigger than an emery board. It's about 5 inches long. It's about
one in a drawer behind me here.
They're bright yellow, and they bring up a little blade. It's kind of like a what you call an X-Acto knife, and it comes up, and about every 1/4 inch there's a little serrated line. Perforated line, and so you can't even cut cardboard with it. But we're expected to believe that this 5'6" terrorist took out the guy who could kill anybody with a pen and a credit card. That was a trained assassin. I mean, really, think about it. Just think. I mean, I just want to shake people sometimes and go, come on, use your common sense. I mean, I didn't question it before, but once I learned who that guy was, I thought, well, okay, this is a Hollywood script gone bad. This isn't even a B-rated movie. But
let me ask you a question there. Do you think that this passenger, this handler, whatever he was, you think he's still alive today? Mm-hmm. So do I.
Definitely he's still alive.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, did you know that Ehud Barak, who's also Sayeret Matkal trained assassin, he was in New York the night before, and it was Ehud Barak that was sitting in the BBC studios on the morning of 9/11, for us, the morning, shortly after the building collapsed, telling us he coined the phrase war on terror. He's the guy who pointed out that we had to start the war on terror.
Yeah.
He's also a trained assassin, a Sayeret Matkal. So is Bibi Netanyahu, and so is 9B. His name was Daniel Lewin, by the way. And when he went to Israel, he changed it to Daniel Levin, I believe. But
yeah, they like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
he also has the most interesting FBI write-up on him I had seen ever. And what I found was really interesting about him, not just him, but also his wife, that the FBI document, and if you shoot me an email and ask for this, I'll send you this. It's a 110-page document from the FBI.
Okay.
And they talk about him, including the type of car he drives, the brand, almost the cost, that he was a multimillionaire, that his mother was a doctor in Jerusalem. You'll find out whether he has manicured fingernails, the brand of tennis shoes he was wearing, the brand of watch he had on board, what his wife looks like, her hair color, her eye color. Now, this is the only spouse that the FBI felt they wanted to put all of this information about these two people. Now, there's so much non-9/11 information about this passenger in 9B that you can't help but go, what the hell? What is this about? It's like you almost go into a novel about this guy and his wife. And it's crazy. And so it's worth reading the FBI document just for that, really. I mean, because you just have to wonder, well, what the heck? And then you find out the women involved. Here's another quick story. This is like a 2-minute story. There was a purser on Flight 11 that was assigned Flight 11 on September 9th by crew scheduling. She lives in Miami. Mm-hmm. They deadheaded her up to Boston. This is really interesting. She got up to Boston and crew scheduling said, oh, we don't need you anymore. We found a different purser to do this. Well, that's very uncommon. Once you're assigned a trip, no matter what airline, because even American told me this, it wasn't taken away from you. So luckily for her, it was taken away from her. So they replaced her with a different purser. She got home to Miami that morning. She obviously left before the ground stop. She got home and there was a message on her home recorder. And this is really creepy because somebody had her phone number somehow. And our personal information as flight attendants is highly protected. Our phone numbers never would be given out. Somebody had gotten into American Airlines phone system to get her number, and here's what was left on her recorder, and she gave this to the FBI. She heard two men speak perfect English say, Bin Laden, twice. And then she heard a woman with a heavy accent speaking in the background. And then one of them, I just don't recall which one, said, if this had anything to do with Israel, there will be a backlash against the Jews. And that was the end of her message. She freaked. One, she was supposed to be on the flight that she was supposed to be on, and she sees what's going on TV. And two, somebody involved in this had her home phone number. And so she called the FBI, and there is they made a tape recording. I'm hoping I have that because I'm not sure how accurate the FBI actually transcribed it. That may be more. But I have some WAV files in my FOIA documents, and I just said I don't have time to go through it all. It's kind of like going through the Library of Congress. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a rabbit hole or a diversion to lead us away from, why would somebody say that and leave this on her? They thought she was going to be dead. They thought her family would come in and get these messages on her recorder. And so they wanted us to know that if this had anything to do with Israel, there would be a backlash against the Jews. Now, who would say that and why? I mean, other than to divert you away from who was doing it.
Well, I can tell you who would say it, the Jews. Because quite honestly, this is the angle they've taken for a long time in framing these kind of adventures.
Okay, you have time for one more quick story?
One more.
The wife of 9B called her cell phone company 3 days after 9/11, and she told a young operator that her husband had died on Flight 11. And that she had some messages that she wanted to have pulled off of her cell phone by the voice stream company, and make a recording of it. So the young gal does, and of course, remember, this was like 3 days after 9/11. We thought we were at a war with somebody, some enemy somewhere, Middle Eastern enemy, I guess. And so this young gal gets her PIN number. She pulls her recordings, and it's not in English. So she kind of freaks out. She wants to tell her supervisor, hey, there's this, they might be terrorists, because, she didn't know what it was. She didn't know what language it was. It just knew it wasn't in English. And so since she had this lady's PIN number, she said, well, I thought it was really suspicious, but her supervisor was like, nah, don't get involved with this. Just let it go. So she takes her PIN number, and she notices that this woman whose husband, she told her, died on Flight 11 had not made or received any cell phone calls on September 11th. And she thought, how weird is this? Her husband dies in this plane crash. Her mother-in-law's visiting from Israel, and nobody calls anybody on her cell phone. She doesn't call out. She doesn't receive any calls. There's no activity that morning at all, that day, on her cell phone. There's a reason for that. She also has a heavy accent. She grew up in Europe, moved to Israel when she was a teenager. It's interesting the things that you see when you open your eyes. And really, when you open your eyes to 9/11, you start to see it all.
Yeah. Rebekah, as I said at the beginning of this, and I'm
coming at me.
somewhat speechless every time I think about it. The book, the information that you're putting out, this video and the interviews that you're doing on an ongoing basis, I know you're working with architects for 9/11 Truth, is important stuff that we need to get out. And I congratulate you for your work and send you energy to continue doing it. And thank you for coming on tonight to grace us with this information as well. It's amazing stuff. Give your website one more time, information about the book.
So you can buy the book at any bookstore. It's on Amazon. It's in Kindle and softback. Amazon, the Kindle is $9.11. You can order it from any bookstore. It takes about a week to get. Of course, downloading it on Kindle is the fastest way. You can get an autographed copy for $20 US or $30 for international shipping from my website on the autographed copy page, and that's just www.methodicalillusion.com.
And that's going to wrap it up for this show. We'll be back next week with L.B. Bork, Red Amendment. I think as we go through these shows the next few months, you're going to put the pieces together. Rebekah Roth, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being who you are and doing what you're doing, and Godspeed in you continuing to do the work. This is Off Planet Radio. I'm Randy Moggins. The truth is out there. It's inside you. Continue to spread it. We'll be back next week.
This is Off Planet Radio. You're off there, I'm off there. Thanks so much.